What happens when a friendly chat show interview turns into a full-blown war? It only took 26 seconds of one question for the entire studio to witness one of the most shocking confrontations in talk show history. This is the story of how actor Ralf Little went from welcome guest to ejected visitor, and how one host's comments sparked a meltdown that nobody saw coming. The morning started like any other episode of Loose Women. The studio audience settled into their seats. The cameras rolled, and the panel took their positions. Denise Welch sat front and center, flanked by Ruth Langsford, Colleen Nolan, and Jane Moore. The topic for the day was supposed to be light, fun, easy television. They were discussing work-life balance, and Ralf Little was invited on to talk about his role in Death in Paradise and how he managed to balance his time between filming in the Caribbean and being home with family. Ralf walked onto the set with a warm smile, waving to the audience, and he seemed relaxed, ready to have a nice conversation about his work and his life. He shook hands with the panel, took his seat, and the interview began. Ruth started things off with a softball question. Ralf, thank you so much for joining us today. We love Death in Paradise. Tell us, what is it like filming in such a beautiful location? Ralf leaned back in his chair and smiled. It is beautiful, honestly. The sunsets are incredible, but it is still work. Long days, hot weather, and you are away from home for months at a time. It is not always as glamorous as people think. The audience nodded. It was a normal response, a humble response. Colleen jumped in next. Do you ever get homesick? I mean, the Caribbean is lovely, but being away from family must be tough. Absolutely, Ralf said. That is probably the hardest part. You miss birthdays. You miss everyday moments. Video calls help, but it is not the same as being there in person. Jane smiled at him. You seem to handle it really well, though. You have always come across as someone who has a good head on your shoulders. I try, Ralf said with a laugh. I think you just have to keep perspective. Remember why you are doing it. For me, it is about the work. I love acting. I love the show, and I am grateful for the opportunity. Everything was going smoothly. The conversation flowed. The audience was engaged. And then Denise Welch decided to take the conversation in a different direction. She leaned forward, a sly smile crossing her face. Ralf, can I ask you something? Do you not think it is a little bit selfish? The studio went quiet. Ralph's smile faded slightly. Sorry, what do you mean? Denise did not hesitate. Well, you are choosing to go off to the Caribbean for months at a time, living this amazing life, while your family is stuck at home. Do you not think that is a bit selfish? And leaving them behind while you are off having fun in the sun? Ruth shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Colleen glanced at Denise with wide eyes. Jane looked down at her notes. The audience was silent. Ralf stared at Denise, clearly taken aback. I do not think it is selfish, Ralf said slowly, choosing his words carefully. It is my job. It is how I provide for my family. I do not think anyone would call a builder selfish for going to work every day. Denise waved her hand dismissively. Oh, come on, Ralf. A builder is not jetting off to paradise, are they? You are living the dream while your partner is doing all the hard work at home. Cooking, cleaning, looking after the kids. And you are on a beach. That is the reality. Ralph's jaw tightened. His voice stayed calm, but there was an edge to it now. That's not fair, Denise. Yes, I am grateful for where I get to work, but it is still work. Long hours. Physically demanding. And I am away from the people I love. It is a sacrifice. Denise laughed. Actually laughed. It was a dismissive, mocking sound that made the other panelists exchange nervous glances. A sacrifice? Ralf, come on. You are not a soldier. You are not a doctor working night shifts. You are an actor on a tropical island. Let us call it what it is. Ruth tried to step in. Denise, I think what Ralf is saying is... But Denise cut her off. No, Ruth, I want to hear Ralf defend this. Because honestly, I think a lot of people watching would agree with me. How is it not selfish to leave your family for months on end while you are living in luxury? Ralf took a deep breath. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair. Denise, with all due respect, you do not know anything about my life. You do not know what conversations I have had with my family, what sacrifices they have made, or what sacrifices I have made. This is my career. This is what I do. And to sit here and have you belittle it, and to call me selfish in front of millions of people, is completely out of line. The audience gasped. Some started murmuring. The other panelists looked shocked. Denise, however, seemed unfazed. In fact, she looked almost pleased that she had gotten under his skin. Out of line? Denise said, her voice rising. I am just asking a question, Ralf. If you cannot handle a bit of scrutiny, maybe you should not be on television. Colleen tried to intervene. Okay, maybe we should move on to... But Ralf was not done. Scrutiny? Denise, there is a difference between scrutiny and being downright rude. You have been condescending from the moment you asked that question, and frankly, it says a lot more about you than it does about me. The studio fell silent again. Denise's face turned red. She leaned forward, pointing a finger at Ralf. Excuse me? What did you just say? You heard me, Ralf said, his voice steady. I came here to talk about my work. I came here to have a nice conversation, but instead, you decided to attack me, and I am not going to sit here and let you do that. Denise stood up. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Attack you? I asked you one simple question, and you are acting like I insulted your entire family. You called me selfish, Ralf shot back, also standing now. You implied that I do not care about my family. That's not a simple question, Denise. And that is an accusation. Ruth quickly stood up too, trying to play peacemaker. Okay, everyone, let us just take a breath here. This is getting a bit heated. Jane nodded. Yes, let us all just calm down for a second. But Denise was not calming down. No, Ruth, I am not going to calm down. This man comes onto our show, and the minute I ask him a tough question, he cannot handle it. He starts throwing insults at me. I did not insult you, Ralf said firmly. I defended myself. There is a difference. You said my question says more about me than you, Denise snapped. That is an insult. Ralf shook his head. No, Denise, it is an observation. You came at me with hostility. You dismissed everything I said. You laughed at me. And now you are playing the victim because I called you out on it. The audience was watching with their mouths open. Some people in the crowd started whispering to each other. The cameras kept rolling. Colleen looked like she wanted to disappear. Ruth was trying to signal to someone off camera, probably a producer. Jane sat frozen, not knowing what to do. Denise crossed her arms. You know what, Ralf? Maybe you should leave. If you cannot handle a proper conversation, maybe you do not belong here. Ruth gasped. Denise, that is... Ralf held up a hand. No, Ruth. It is fine. She is right. I do not belong here. Not if this is how guests are treated. He unclipped his microphone, his hands moving quickly, but calmly. The entire studio watched as he stood up, straightened his jacket, and looked directly at Denise. You know what the sad thing is, Denise? Ralf said quietly. I actually used to respect you. I thought you were someone who stood up for people, someone who championed fairness. But today, you showed me exactly who you really are. Someone who tears people down to make yourself feel important, and I want no part of that. The audience started clapping. Not all of them, but enough to make it noticeable. Denise's face went from red to pale. Ruth looked mortified. Colleen and Jane sat in stunned silence. Denise tried to respond. How dare you? But Ralf was already walking off the set. He did not look back. He did not stop. He walked past the cameras, past the crew, and straight toward the exit. The entire studio was in chaos. The producers were scrambling. The other panelists were talking over each other. Ruth turned to Denise, her voice shaking. Denise, what just happened? Why did you push him like that? Denise threw her hands up. I did not push him. He is being ridiculous. I asked a fair question. Colleen shook her head. Denise, you called him selfish on live television. How is that a fair question? Jane finally spoke up. She is right, Denise. That was way out of line. You attacked the man. Denise looked around at her fellow panelists, her mouth opening and closing like she could not believe they were turning on her. You are all siding with him? He insulted me. He defended himself, Ruth said firmly. There is a difference. Denise, you went too far. The camera cut to a wide shot. The audience was still buzzing. Some people were shaking their heads. Others were whispering to their neighbors. The energy in the room had completely shifted. What was supposed to be a light, the fun interview had turned into one of the most uncomfortable moments in the show's history. Off camera, Ralf was being ushered into a side room by a producer. He sat down on a couch, rubbing his face with his hands. The producer handed him a bottle of water. Are you okay? The producer asked. Ralf nodded slowly. Yeah, I am okay. I could not stay out there. She was trying to humiliate me. The producer sighed. I know. I am so sorry. That should never have happened. We are going to have a serious conversation with her. Back on set, the show was trying to recover. Ruth was speaking directly to the camera, her voice strained. Well, that was certainly unexpected. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will continue with our panel discussion. But the damage was done. The cameras cut to commercials, and the second they did, Denise stood up and stormed off set. Ruth called after her, but Denise did not stop. She disappeared through the same exit Ralf had taken just minutes earlier. Colleen looked at Ruth and Jane. What just happened? Ruth shook her head. I have no idea, but that was one of the worst things I have ever seen on this show. Jane agreed. Denise crossed a line. She was completely out of order. The audience was still talking amongst themselves. Some were checking their phones, already seeing clips of the confrontation being shared online. The moment had happened so fast. But it was clear that this was going to be talked about for a long time. In the side room, Ralf stood up and grabbed his jacket. The producer tried to convince him to stay, to at least talk things through, but Ralf politely declined. I appreciate everything, Ralf said, but I need to leave. I cannot go back out there. Not after that. The producer nodded. I understand. Again, I am so sorry. This should not have happened. Ralf gave a small, tired smile. It is not your fault. I take care. He walked out of the building, stepping into the cool morning air. He took a deep breath, letting the tension drain from his body. He had come to the show expecting a pleasant, easy interview. Instead, he had been blindsided by hostility and condescension. But he had stood up for himself. He had refused to be belittled. And as he walked away, he felt a strange sense of relief. Back inside the studio, the show was attempting to continue. Ruth, Colleen, and Jane sat at the panel and trying to move on to the next topic. But the energy was gone. The audience was distracted. Everyone was still thinking about what had just happened. Ruth looked at the camera, forcing a smile. So, moving on, let us talk about our next topic. But nobody was really listening. The moment had overshadowed everything else. Denise had tried to dominate the conversation, to make herself the center of attention by tearing down a guest. But instead, because she had revealed her true colors. She had shown that she was willing to attack someone unprovoked, to humiliate them on live television for no reason other than her own ego. And Ralf? He had walked away with his dignity intact. He had refused to play her game. He had spoken his truth, stood his ground, and left on his own terms. He had been the bigger person, and everyone watching knew it. The cameras kept rolling, but the show had already lost. The moment Denise asked that question, the moment she decided to attack instead of engage, the show was over, and the audience, both in the studio and at home, would not forget it. In the hallway backstage, Denise paced back and forth, her phone in her hand. She was reading messages, seeing the reactions already pouring in, and they were not in her favor. People were calling her out. They were defending Ralf. They were saying she had gone too far. A crew member walked past, giving her a disapproving look. Denise stopped pacing and glared at them. "What?" The crew member said nothing and kept walking. Denise clenched her jaw. She could feel it. The tide was turning against her, and deep down, she knew why. She had overstepped. She had been cruel, and now she was facing the consequences. But instead of reflecting on her actions, instead of considering that maybe she was in the wrong, Denise doubled down. She convinced herself that she was the victim, that Ralf had overreacted, and that everyone was being too sensitive. It was easier than admitting the truth. Back on set, the show finally wrapped. The audience filed out, still buzzing about what they had witnessed. Ruth, Colleen, and Jane stood up, removing their microphones. They exchanged glances, but did not say much. What was there to say? The day had been a disaster. Ruth sighed. "I need a cup of tea." Colleen nodded. "Make that too." Jane just shook her head and walked off without a word. In another part of the city, Ralf was sitting in a cafe, nursing a coffee. His phone had been ringing nonstop. Friends checking in. His agent calling to see if he was okay. Messages of support flooding in from people who had seen what happened. And while he appreciated it all, he just wanted to be alone for a bit, to process what had happened. He thought about the exchange. He replayed it in his mind. Had he done the right thing? Should he have stayed calm? Should he have let it go? But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that no, he had done exactly what he needed to do. He had stood up for himself. He had refused to be disrespected. And that was something to be proud of. Because at the end of the day, this was not just about one interview. It was about setting boundaries. It was about not letting people treat you poorly just because they have a platform. It was about recognizing when someone is trying to tear you down and refusing to give them the satisfaction. Denise Welch had tried to make Ralf Little look bad. She had tried to paint him as selfish, as someone who did not care about his family. But in doing so, she had only exposed her own flaws, her own need to dominate, her own inability to have a respectful conversation. And Ralf? He had walked away knowing that he had done nothing wrong, that he had been respectful. That he had only defended himself when pushed too far. He had been the good guy, and everyone watching knew it. The confrontation had lasted only a few minutes, but it had been enough to show the world exactly who Denise Welch really was. Someone who was willing to attack a guest for no reason. Someone who was entitled enough to think she could get away with it. And someone who, when challenged, could not handle being called out. Ralf finished his coffee and stood up. He pulled on his jacket and walked out into the street. The city was busy, people rushing past, completely unaware of what had just happened in that television studio. And that was fine. Ralf did not need the whole world to know. He just needed to know that he had stood his ground. As he walked down the street, his phone buzzed again. Another message of support. He smiled, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and kept walking. He had a life to get back to, a family to go home to, work to do. And he was not going to let one hostile interview define his day. Meanwhile, back at the studio, the producers were in a meeting, trying to figure out what to do, how to handle the fallout, how to address what had happened. Because this was not just a minor disagreement. This was a full-blown confrontation that had been broadcast to millions of people. And there would be consequences. One producer looked at the others. "We need to issue a statement." Another nodded. "Agreed." But what do we say?" "We apologize to Ralph," the first producer said, "and we make it clear that what happened was unacceptable." The room fell silent. Everyone knew that was the right thing to do, but it also meant holding one of their hosts accountable, and that was never easy. Still, it had to be done, because at the end of the day, guests should feel safe coming on the show. They should feel respected, and what Denise had done was the opposite of that. She had created a hostile environment. She had attacked someone who had done nothing to deserve it, and the show could not condone that. Denise sat in her dressing room, staring at herself in the mirror. She could see it in her own eyes. The frustration, the anger, the refusal to accept that maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong. But accepting that would mean admitting she had made a mistake. And Denise did not like admitting mistakes. So instead, she blamed Ralph. And she told herself that he had been too sensitive, that he had overreacted, that he was the problem, not her. It was easier that way. Easier than looking in the mirror and acknowledging that she had been cruel, that she had gone too far, that she had let her ego get in the way of basic decency. But deep down, in a place she would never admit to anyone, not even herself, she knew. She knew she had messed up. She knew she had been out of line. And she knew that this moment, this confrontation, how it would follow her for a long time. Because television does not forget. Audiences do not forget. And when you show your true colors on live television, there is no taking it back. The moment is captured. The words are recorded. And the world gets to see exactly who you are. Ruth walked into the green room where Denise had retreated. She found her colleague sitting on a sofa, arms crossed, staring at the wall. Ruth closed the door behind her and took a seat across from Denise. "Denise, we need to talk about what just happened out there." Denise did not look at her. "There is nothing to talk about. He made a scene. He embarrassed himself." Ruth shook her head slowly. "Denise, you know that is not what happened. You called him selfish. You dismissed everything he said. You were aggressive from the start." "I was asking tough questions," Denise shot back. "That is what we do on this show. We challenge people. We push back. That is our job." Ruth leaned forward. "There is a difference between challenging someone and attacking them. You crossed that line. Ralph was being open and honest, and you went straight for his throat." Denise finally looked at Ruth, her eyes flashing with anger. "So everyone is on his side now? Is that it? I am the bad guy?" "Nobody is saying you are a bad guy," Ruth said carefully. "But what you did today was wrong. You need to accept that." Denise stood up abruptly. "I do not need to accept anything. I did my job. Why, and if he cannot handle it, that is his problem." Ruth sighed. She could see that Denise was not going to budge. Not right now. Maybe not ever. "Fine. But just so you know, the producers are not happy. Neither is anyone else. You might want to think about that." Denise grabbed her bag and headed for the door. "I will think about whatever I want. And right now, I want to go home." She left without another word, leaving Ruth sitting alone in the green room. Ruth put her head in her hands. And this was bad. Really bad. And she knew that the fallout from today would last far longer than anyone wanted. Outside the studio, members of the audience were gathering in small groups, still talking about what they had witnessed. One woman turned to her friend. "I cannot believe what just happened in there. That was insane." Her friend nodded. Denise was completely out of line. That poor man. He was just trying to talk about his work. I know, the first woman said. And did you see how the other panelists looked? They were horrified. Even they knew she went too far. Another audience member joined the conversation. I have been watching Loose Women for years, and I have never seen anything like that. Denise was on the attack from the moment she opened her mouth. It was uncomfortable to watch. Uncomfortable is putting it lightly, someone else added. It was downright hostile, and Ralf handled it so well. He kept his cool. He defended himself. And then he left with his head held high. Good for him. The consensus was clear. The audience had seen exactly what happened, and they were not on Denise's side. Not even close. They had witnessed a host abuse her position, attack a guest without cause, and then refuse to take any responsibility for it. And they would not forget it. Back at his home, Ralf walked through the front door. His partner looked up from the kitchen, surprised to see him back so early. You are home already? How did the interview go? Ralf set his keys down on the counter and took a deep breath. It did not go well. Actually, it went pretty badly. His partner walked over, concern etched on their face. What happened? Ralf sat down at the kitchen table and told them everything. The question, the accusation, the confrontation, the walk-off. His partner listened quietly, their expression shifting from concern to anger to support. When Ralf finished, his partner reached across the table and took his hand. I am so sorry you had to deal with that. But I am proud of you for standing up for yourself. You did the right thing. Ralf smiled weakly. Thanks. I could not sit there and let her say those things. It was not fair. None of it was fair. You are absolutely right, his partner said firmly. And anyone who watches that will see exactly what happened. They will see that you were attacked for no reason and that you handled it with grace. Do not doubt yourself. Ralf nodded. He felt a weight lifting off his shoulders. Being home, being with the person who knew him best, reminded him why he had walked away. Because some things are more important than staying on a television show. Dignity, respect, self-worth. Those things mattered more than any interview. At the studio, the producers had finished their emergency meeting. They had made their decision. A statement would be released. Denise would be spoken to, and changes would be made to ensure that something like this never happened again. Because at the end of the day, the show's reputation was on the line, and they could not afford to let hosts treat guests the way Denise had treated Ralf. One of the senior producers looked around the room. We all agree then? We make it clear that what happened today was unacceptable? The others nodded. Agreed. We cannot let this slide. Guests need to feel safe coming on this show. If they do not, we will lose credibility. We will lose viewers. We will lose everything we have built. Then it is settled, the senior producer said. Draft the statement. Make it clear. Make it sincere. And make sure everyone knows that this will not happen again. The meeting ended, and the producers dispersed. Each of them knew that this was a turning point. The show would either recover from this, or it would not. And a lot of that depended on how they handled the next few days. Colleen and Jane met up in the studio parking lot as they were leaving. Jane looked exhausted. What a day! I still cannot believe that happened. Colleen nodded. Me neither. I have been on this show for years, and I have never seen anything like it. Denise was out of control. Do you think she will apologize? Jane asked. Colleen thought for a moment. I do not know. I hope so. But based on how she acted today, I am not holding my breath. She seemed pretty convinced that she did nothing wrong. Jane sighed. That is what worries me. If she cannot see that she was in the wrong, then what does that say about her? About us? We are supposed to be a team, but today it felt like we were watching a train wreck and could not do anything to stop it. I know, Colleen agreed. And poor Ralf. He did not deserve any of that. He was nothing but polite and professional, and Denise just tore into him. They stood in silence for a moment, both processing what had happened. Finally, Jane spoke again. I think I need to go home and just forget about today. This is going to haunt me for a while. Colleen gave her a hug. Me too. Let us just hope tomorrow is better. They parted ways, each heading to their own car. The weight of the day hung heavy on both of them. They had been part of something they wished they had not witnessed. And they knew that the repercussions of today would be felt for a long time. That day, Denise Welch had shown the world who she was, and Ralf Little had shown the world who he was. One had chosen hostility, the other had chosen dignity. One had attacked, the other had defended. And in the end, it was clear who had won. The story spread quickly. Clips of the confrontation were shared thousands of times. People dissected every word, every facial expression, every moment. And the consensus was clear. Denise had been out of line. Ralf had been right to walk away, and the show had lost control of what should have been a simple, pleasant interview. What happens when a friendly chat show interview turns into a full-blown war? You get a moment that nobody forgets. A moment that defines careers. A moment that shows the world who people really are when the cameras are rolling and there is nowhere to hide. And this was that moment. A moment where Ralf Little stood his ground, where Denise Welch revealed her true nature, and where a television show learned that respect should never be optional, no matter who is sitting in the guest chair.